The flyer fluttered onto my windshield like it had been waiting for me. Black and red, the words shimmered unnaturally. The Midnight Carnival. Wonders beyond your imagination. One night only. I should have ignored it. I was on my way out of town, leaving behind debts, a dead-end job, and a sense of suffocating failure. The last thing I needed was a detour. But the flyer spoke to some deep, primal curiosity. Against my better judgment, I followed the directions scrawled in bold beneath the tagline. Exit 33. Turn left. Follow the lanterns. The lanterns began almost immediately after the turn, flickering red flames in the darkness. They lined a winding dirt road that seemed to stretch endlessly into shadow. By the time I reached the entrance, I was already unnerved. A massive iron gate loomed before me, creaking open as though I'd been expected. Beyond it was a carnival unlike any I'd ever seen. Tent poles pierced the inky sky, and strings of glowing orbs bathed the grounds in an eerie, pulsating light. Strange music wafted through the air, hypnotic and disjointed. I stepped out of my car and into a world that smelled of sugar and decay. As I stepped through the gates, the iron bars slammed shut behind me with a metallic clang that rattled through my chest. I spun around, startled, but no one was there to lock them. The road back was gone. Just the gate, tall and unmoving, now overgrown with ivy that hadn't been there moments before. Ahead of me, the carnival stretched out like a surreal labyrinth. Brightly painted tents spiraled upward, but the colors seemed to ripple like oil on water. The music grew louder as I approached, a haunting blend of calliope and whispers. Shadows moved within the tents, too large to be human. A man in a crimson suit appeared before me, as if conjured by the music. His face was pale, his features sharp enough to cut. A wide-brimmed hat cast half of his face in shadow, but his smile gleamed unnaturally. "Welcome, honored guest," he purred. His voice was velvet and venom all at once. "Tonight, the Midnight Carnival reveals its most wondrous sights to those brave enough to look. Your ticket, please." "I don't have a ticket," I said, my voice faltering. His smile widened. "Oh, but you do." He reached out and I instinctively recoiled. He plucked the flyer from my hand, which I didn't even realize I'd been clutching. "One ticket to everything, then," he said, bowing slightly. "Enjoy the show, Finn." "How do you know my—" I started, but he was already gone, his laughter echoing through the air. The main path twisted and turned without logic, the tents growing taller and more ornate as I walked. Each one had a sign scrawled in glowing, jagged letters. "Madame Vera. She sees what you fear." The Faceless Twins, a symmetry like no other. The Hall of Echoes. Hear what you cannot forget. I passed them all, my heart pounding. I couldn't decide if I was terrified or intrigued. The air was thick, almost syrupy, and every breath felt heavier than the last. I wasn't sure if it was my imagination or if the ground was slightly slanted, pulling me deeper into the carnival. The music changed, slower now, more mournful. I stopped in front of a small, tattered tent that looked out of place among the grandeur. Its sign was a simple wooden plank nailed haphazardly above the flap. The puppeteer's stage. Something about it drew me in. My fingers brushed the flap aside, and I stepped into the dim, candlelit space. Inside, rows of wooden chairs faced a tiny stage. A marionette dangled in the center, its strings reaching up into the darkness. The puppet's face was painted white with exaggerated black eyes and a stitched-on grin that made my stomach churn. I moved closer. As I reached the front row, the marionette's head snapped toward me. Its painted eyes locked onto mine, and its grin widened. I froze. "Sit," it said in a hollow, childlike voice. The strings tightened, and the puppet's hand gestured toward the chair directly in front of it. My legs moved before I could think, collapsing into the seat as if the puppet had pulled the strings on me. The puppet jerked unnaturally, its limbs twisting as if it were struggling against an invisible force. Then the shadows above the stage began to move. Slowly, a figure descended, holding the marionette's strings. The puppeteer wore a mask that resembled cracked porcelain, with dark voids where the eyes should have been. Its hands, gnarled and spindly, worked the strings with precision. "You shouldn't have come here," the puppet said, though its painted lips didn't move. The puppeteer tilted its head, almost as if nodding in agreement. "What is this place?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. The puppet tilted its head, mirroring its master. "A place between places. A show for the damned. And you, Finn." It paused, the silence suffocating. "You bought your ticket." "I didn't buy anything," I shouted, standing up, but the puppet's strings yanked taut, and my body slammed back into the chair. I gasped, unable to move. "Everyone pays the price," the puppet crooned, its voice sing-song now. "Tell me, Finn, what would you give to leave? What would you sacrifice?" The puppeteer leaned closer, its empty eyes boring into me. The strings around the marionette began to fray, unraveling like thread. "Choose carefully," it whispered, though no lips moved. "Some choices cannot be undone." I couldn't move. The strings coiled tighter around me, invisible but suffocating. The marionette's painted grin seemed to grow wider, impossibly so, like the crescent moon stretching into a mocking sneer. "Sacrifice." I managed to choke out. "What the hell does that mean?" The puppeteer's mask shifted, the cracks deepening as it tilted its head. Its fingers moved deftly, manipulating the marionette's limp limbs into a grotesque dance. The puppet's voice, hollow and childlike, answered for it. "Oh, it could mean so many things. A memory you treasure, a secret you guard, a love you cherish." Or, the puppet's voice grew darker, its tone dropping to a near growl. "Something far more costly." The strings around my wrists tugged, pulling my arms upward. My body jerked against my will, a marionette in their hands. Panic clawed at my chest. "I didn't ask to be here," I shouted, my voice cracking. "I don't want this." The puppeteer's mask seemed to lean closer, the darkness behind its empty eyes stretching outward like a tangible force. The marionette went limp, its strings slackening. For a moment, I thought it was over. Then the puppet's head snapped back up, and its voice hissed. "You were chosen, Finn, and you don't leave the carnival unless you pay." The shadows behind the stage writhed as if alive, and in them, I saw glimpses of people, terrified faces, silent screams. One of them, a young woman with hollow eyes and pale skin, looked directly at me. Her lips moved silently, forming words I couldn't hear. Then she was gone, swallowed by the darkness. I didn't know what drove me to speak. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was the oppressive weight of the strings, threatening to crush me. "If I don't pay?" I asked. The marionette's head lolled to one side. "Oh, then you stay. Forever. You'll join the show, Finn. You'll dance. You'll smile." Its grin widened, splitting its painted face in half. "You'll be part of the act." "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "I'll find another way out." The puppeteer's mask cracked further, a jagged line splitting across its porcelain surface. It extended one of its gnarled hands, and I felt the strings binding me begin to quiver. My limbs jerked violently, as if I were being puppeteered into place. My feet dragged across the floor, pulling me toward the stage. "Stop," I screamed, but my voice was drowned out by laughter. Hollow, echoing laughter that came from nowhere and everywhere at once. The strings pulled me forward until I stood on the stage, facing the rows of empty chairs. But they weren't empty anymore. Figures began to materialize in the seats, one by one. Their faces were pale, lifeless, and yet their eyes glowed with a sickly light. Some were faceless, their features melting like wax. They stared at me, their heads tilting unnaturally in unison. The marionette spoke again, its voice almost giddy. "The audience loves new performers. Don't they, master?" The puppeteers had tilted in approval, and I felt the strings tighten around my throat. My vision blurred, my breath coming in short gasps. I tried to scream, to resist, but the shadows around the stage began to pull at me, swallowing me whole. "No," I shouted, summoning every ounce of willpower I had left. My hand shot out, grabbing at the marionette's dangling strings. I yanked hard, and the puppet's painted face twisted into a grimace. The puppeteer froze, its masked face looming above me. For the first time, it hesitated. I didn't know what I was doing, but I knew I had to act fast. With both hands, I grabbed at the strings binding me and tore at them, ignoring the searing pain as they sliced into my skin. Each thread I snapped sent a jolt of agony through my body, but I kept going. The audience let out a collective gasp, their hollow eyes widening as the strings around me unraveled. The marionette convulsed violently, its limbs flailing as if it were being torn apart. The puppeteer reached for me, its movements frantic, but it was too late. With a final scream, I tore the last string free, collapsing to the ground as the stage erupted into chaos. The shadows recoiled, writhing like living things. The puppeteer let out a guttural, inhuman wail as its mask shattered, revealing nothing beneath but a swirling void. I scrambled to my feet, stumbling off the stage and back toward the tent's entrance. The audience stood now, their twisted forms reaching for me, but their movements were sluggish, hindered by the chaos. The tent flap was in sight. I ran. I burst out of the tent and into the cold night air, my chest heaving. The music was gone, replaced by a low, pulsing hum that seemed to come from the ground itself. The carnival had changed. The vibrant colors of the tents had dulled to lifeless grays, and the flickering lights overhead cast distorted shadows that stretched and twisted unnaturally. I stumbled forward, my legs trembling. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to get out. Fin. The voice stopped me cold. It wasn't the marionette's voice or the puppeteer's. It was soft, familiar. I turned slowly. There, standing beneath a flickering lantern, was the woman I had seen in the shadows. Her hollow eyes had softened, her face filled with sorrow. "Don't run," she said. "If you want to escape, you have to go to the heart of the carnival." "The heart?" I asked, my voice trembling. "What is that? Where is it?" Her lips parted, but before she could answer, a deafening roar erupted from the direction of the puppeteer's tent. I turned to see the entire structure collapse into a swirling vortex of darkness. "Go," she screamed, her voice breaking. "Before it finds you." I didn't wait for her to say it again. I ran, the ground beneath me shifting and buckling as though the carnival itself were alive, resisting my escape. The air thickened, every breath a struggle. Tents twisted and collapsed around me, their structures folding inward like they were being devoured by an unseen force. The path led to a massive central tent, its fabric pulsating like a beating heart. It towered over the carnival, its stripes black and red, glowing faintly in the dim light. Shadows pooled at its base, writhing like living things. This had to be the heart. I hesitated at the entrance, the flaps swaying as if beckoning me inside. Behind me, I heard the roar again, closer now. The puppeteer was coming. I pushed through the flap, stepping into a cavernous space that defied logic. The inside of the tent was impossibly vast, a sprawling void filled with mirrors. They stretched infinitely in all directions, reflecting distorted versions of myself, some smiling, others twisted in agony. At the center of the space stood a figure draped in a cloak of shimmering threads. Its face was obscured, but its presence radiated power. Strings dangled from its hands, trailing into the mirrors and vanishing into the void. "You made it," the figure said, its voice deep and resonant. "Not many do." "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I am the heart of the carnival," it replied, "the puppet master of this domain. And you, Finn, are an anomaly." "Let me go," I said, my fists clenching. "I don't belong here." The figure chuckled, a low, chilling sound. "No one does. Yet everyone finds their way here eventually. You tore your strings, Finn, but you're still tethered. You can only leave if you cut the thread that binds you." I glanced at the mirrors around me. In each reflection, a glowing thread extended from my chest, connecting to the figure's hand. My own reflection stared back, some versions pleading, others mocking. "What happens if I cut it?" I asked. That is up to you, the figure said, its tone unreadable. Freedom always comes with a price. The roar outside grew deafening, the shadows spilling into the tent like a tide. The puppeteer was here, its shattered mask revealing nothing but a swirling void. It reached for me with clawed hands, the strings dragging behind it like chains. Decide, the heart said, its voice calm amidst the chaos. I grabbed the nearest shard of broken glass from the ground, its jagged edge trembling in my grip. My reflection in the mirrors smiled, frowned, screamed. The glowing thread pulsed with a life of its own, and I hesitated. What will I lose? I whispered. The figure tilted its head. The part of you that brought you here. The part that let you fall into the carnival's grasp. Only you know what that is. The puppeteer lunged, its strings snapping toward me like whips. My body moved on instinct. I slashed the shard through the glowing thread. A deafening silence followed. The mirror shattered all at once, and the puppeteer let out a piercing wail as it was torn apart by the collapsing shadows. The heart of the carnival tilted its head one last time, its form dissolving into the void. I fell to my knees as the ground beneath me crumbled. Light consumed everything. I woke up on the side of the road, the morning sun blinding me. My car sat idling a few feet away, its door open like I'd just stepped out. The flyer for the carnival lay on the ground beside me, blank and crumpled. My chest felt lighter, as though a weight I hadn't known I was carrying had been lifted. But something was missing, memories, maybe, or a piece of myself I couldn't name. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. For just a moment, I thought I saw the carnival gates in the distance, their iron bars twisting into a mocking grin. But when I blinked, they were gone. Weeks passed, and life returned to something resembling normal. Yet, in quiet moments, I felt the absence of the thing I had sacrificed. I couldn't remember what it was, but its loss echoed in the corners of my mind. Sometimes I still dream of the carnival, of strings, mirrors, and the haunting melody of the calliope. And sometimes, when the wind carries just the right tune, I feel the faintest tug at my chest, like a thread waiting to be pulled. They called it the Everlasting Carnival, though nobody ever remembered when it first arrived in town. The posters appeared overnight, plastered to lampposts and bus stops, promising an unforgettable experience. Marvels beyond imagination. Wonders of the world, old and new. One night only. But here's the thing. There were no dates, no addresses. Just an arrow. No matter where you were, you'd find the posters, and the arrow always pointed the same way. I first saw one during my midnight shift at the gas station. By the time my break rolled around, curiosity had me following the arrows. The path led through an overgrown field to a clearing lit with flickering, colorful lanterns. In the center stood a massive tent striped in faded red and gold. A hand-painted sign above the entrance read, "The Sideshow of Secrets. Come, let us amaze you." A man stood at the flap. He wasn't dressed like a carnival barker, just an ordinary-looking guy with tired eyes and a half-smile that didn't quite reach them. He handed me a black ticket with red lettering. "Once you enter, you must stay for the whole show," he said. His voice was flat, like he was reciting a line he didn't believe in anymore.
No refunds.
No leaving early. Do you accept the rules? I hesitated. Something about the tent felt off. Too quiet. The shadows inside too deep. But the ticket burned in my hand, as if urging me forward. Before I could think better of it, I nodded. The man stepped aside, the tent flap falling shut behind me with a whisper. Inside, the air was thick with incense, sweet and cloying. The tent was much larger on the inside, sprawling with rows of folding chairs arranged in a circle around a raised platform. A handful of people sat scattered among the seats, their faces blank and their eyes unfocused. "Ladies and gentlemen," boomed a voice. A spotlight flared to life, illuminating the center of the platform. A ringmaster appeared, his crimson coat glittering in the light. His face was painted white, his features exaggerated with black eyeliner and a blood-red smile. "Welcome to the Sideshow of Secrets. Tonight, you'll see wonders and horrors the world has never known." The audience didn't clap. Nobody moved. The ringmaster didn't seem to notice. Or maybe he didn't care. "Allow me to introduce our first performer," he continued, sweeping his arm toward a smaller stage that rose from the ground. A woman in a sparkling gown stood there, her eyes shining unnaturally bright. The Oracle of Lies. She knows all your secrets, all your regrets, all your sins, and she will share them if you dare. The Oracle scanned the crowd, her gaze landing on me. Her voice rang out, clear and cold. "You." She pointed directly at me. "Come forward." I froze, but the spotlight was already on me. My legs moved on their own, carrying me to the platform as the audience's blank eyes followed my every step. The Oracle reached out, her fingers cold and brittle as they closed around my wrist. "Let me show you," she whispered, her words like frost on my skin. The world around me dissolved. I was no longer in the tent, but in my childhood bedroom. It was just as I remembered it. Posters on the walls, clutter on the floor, the faint hum of my old desktop computer. But something was wrong. The shadows stretched too far, pooling in the corners like living things. A voice echoed from the shadows. "Do you remember, Finn?" I turned to see a figure emerge, its form shifting and flickering like a dying TV signal. It was me, but not quite. Its eyes were sunken, its face gaunt, and it wore the same expression I had seen in my darkest moments. "Remember what you did?" it asked, its voice layered with mine and something deeper, darker. I didn't answer. I couldn't. But the figure laughed, a sound like breaking glass. The room shattered, and I was back on the platform, the Oracle's grip tightening. Her eyes bore into mine, and she spoke the words I had tried to bury. "You left him there. You walked away." My chest felt like it had caved in. I wanted to scream, to deny it, but I couldn't. The truth hung in the air between us, undeniable and suffocating. The Oracle released me, and I stumbled back into my seat. The ringmaster's grin seemed wider now, more predatory. Secrets," he said, his voice dripping with amusement. "They make the best entertainment, don't you think?" The show continued, each act more unsettling than the last. A strongman who bent steel bars that screamed like living things. A contortionist who twisted herself into impossible shapes, her limbs snapping audibly with every move. A ventriloquist whose dummy whispered things so vile that people began to cry silently in their seats. And then came the final act. The ringmaster stepped onto the platform, the spotlight illuminating his painted face. "For our grand finale," he announced, "we bring you the performer without a name. A mystery even to us. And tonight, they will reveal the truth of this carnival." A figure emerged from the shadows, its face obscured by a dark hood. It moved with an eerie grace, taking its place on the stage. The ringmaster turned to the audience, his grin now almost feral. "The performer will choose one among you, one who will take their place." The hooded figure's hand rose, and I felt a chill run through me as it pointed directly at me. The hooded figure descended from the stage with unnerving fluidity, gliding toward me as though its feet never touched the ground. My breath caught in my throat, the weight of the audience's empty stares pressing down on me. I wanted to run, to scream, but I couldn't move. The performer without a name stopped inches from my chair, and I could see nothing beneath the hood. Only a void, swirling and endless. "Stand," it said, its voice hollow and layered, as if countless others spoke in unison. My body obeyed, rising to my feet without my consent. The ringmaster clapped his hands, the sound echoing unnaturally through the tent. An excellent choice. Come, Finn, embrace your role." I opened my mouth to protest, but no sound came out. The performer reached out, its fingers impossibly long and thin, and pressed them against my forehead. A cold shock ran through me, and the world around me dissolved again. When my vision cleared, I was no longer in the tent. I stood in a dim, endless void, where faint whispers filled the air. Shapes flickered in the darkness, faces, hands, fragments of bodies, all reaching, pleading. "What is this?" I asked, my voice trembling. "This," the performer said, its hooded form appearing beside me, "is the heart of the carnival. A place between the living and the dead, between truth and illusion." I turned to face it, anger flaring through my fear. Why me? What did I do to deserve this? The performers had tilted, as if studying me. "You were chosen because you carry guilt, secrets,
Pain.
you came here seeking escape, but all paths in this carnival lead inward, to yourself." The whispers grew louder, the fragments in the darkness coalescing into familiar forms. My brother's face emerged from the void, his expression twisted in anguish. Memories flooded back unbidden. The night I left him in that house, his cries for help as I walked away, the silence that followed. "You didn't save me," the shadow that wore his face said, its voice trembling with betrayal. "You let me stay with them." I staggered back, my chest tight. "It wasn't my fault. I was just a kid. I couldn't save you." The performer's voice was quiet but sharp. "You cannot run from what haunts you. The carnival reveals all. The question is, will you face it?" The void shifted, the darkness parting to reveal the carnival tent. I stood back in the center of the ring, the audience now gone. The only other figure was the performer without a name, standing motionless. "Your trial begins," it said, and the ground beneath me split open. I fell into a corridor lined with mirrors, their surfaces warped and cracked. My reflection appeared in each one, but they weren't me. Not exactly. In one, I saw myself laughing while my brother cried. In another, I saw myself running away as flames consumed the house. "Stop it," I screamed, but the images only grew more vivid. The performer's voice echoed around me. "You must make a choice, Finn. Carry your guilt and become part of the carnival, or confront it and find release." I reached the end of the corridor, where a single unbroken mirror stood. It reflected my brother's face, tears streaming down his cheeks. I hesitated, then reached out to touch the glass.
"I am sorry," he whispered.
"I should have protected you. I should have been stronger." The mirror shattered, and I was thrown backward. When I opened my eyes, I was back in the tent, lying on the ground. The ringmaster stood over me, his grin wider than ever. "Well done," he said, his tone dripping with mockery. "A brave performance, truly." The audience had returned, their blank eyes fixed on me. The ringmaster clapped, and the hooded performer stepped forward. Its hands reached up, pulling back its hood to reveal my own face. Pale, gaunt, and hollow-eyed. I stared at it, frozen in horror. What is this?" "You have taken their place," the ringmaster said, his voice echoing with glee. "The performer without a name is you now, Finn. A role earned, not given." The figure, my reflection, took my hand, and I felt the strings tightening around me. My body stiffened as if I were a puppet, my movements no longer my own. The crowd began to cheer, their hollow faces breaking into grotesque grins.
"Nah."
I screamed, but my voice was swallowed by the music, which rose to a deafening crescendo. My reflection whispered one last thing before the darkness consumed me. "Everyone pays the price." I woke up in my bed, drenched in sweat. The carnival was gone.
No posters, no arroz, no tem.
Just the suffocating silence of my apartment. I tried to convince myself it had been a nightmare, but when I looked in the mirror, I saw them. Thin, faint strings, glowing red and trailing into the shadows behind me. The carnival never really leaves. Nobody liked Grinny the clown. He wasn't the goofy, balloon animal-making kind you'd see at kids' parties. He was the type of clown whose laughter sounded too forced, whose painted smile never reached his hollow eyes. The kind who showed up at the edge of nightmares. In our town, his name was whispered like a bad omen. Some said he'd been part of a traveling circus that mysteriously vanished. Others claimed he was an escaped convict who used the makeup to hide his identity. Whatever the story, the truth was far worse. Grinny was real, and people were disappearing. It started when the posters appeared overnight. They were everywhere, on storefronts, light poles, even stapled to the trees in the woods. Each one was the same, garish and unsettling. The Grinny Carnival. Come for the fun, stay forever. Beneath the title was an image of the clown himself, his white face paint cracked like old porcelain, his red grin stretching ear to ear. His eyes were sunken pits of shadow, staring straight through you no matter where you stood. The tagline beneath him read, "One night only." The carnival was set up on the outskirts of town, in a clearing near the old quarry. Nobody remembered seeing trucks or workers, yet there it stood, glowing with eerie lights. My friends, Kevin and Sophie, were intrigued.
Me?
Not so much. But when Kevin dared me to come along, I couldn't back down. We arrived just after sunset. The carnival was alive with movement, but something felt wrong. The rides creaked as if they were older than the trees surrounding the area. The music from the carousel sounded warped, like a dying calliope. And the people, they moved too stiffly, their faces frozen in expressions of vacant joy. "Creepy as hell," Sophie muttered, sticking close to me. "Why are they smiling like that?" Kevin grinned, pretending to be unfazed. "Relax. It's all part of the act. Let's check out the big tent." The big top loomed at the center of the carnival, its stripes of faded black and crimson. As we approached, the air grew colder, the distant sounds of laughter turning to distorted echoes. A man stood at the entrance, tall and skeletal, his face painted white with a streak of red slashing across his mouth. "Welcome to the Grinny Carnival," he rasped, bowing low. "The show is about to begin. Step right in." I hesitated. Everything in me screamed to turn around, to leave, but Kevin pulled us forward. "Come on, don't chicken out now." Inside, the tent was packed, but the audience was silent, their smiles eerily identical. At the center of the ring stood a single spotlight, illuminating an empty stage. Suddenly, the lights dimmed, and the spotlight turned blood red. "Ladies and gentlemen," a deep, guttural voice boomed, "welcome to my carnival." The tent's entrance slammed shut, and the ringmaster emerged. No, not a ringmaster, Grinny the clown. His appearance was worse in person. His suit hung loose on his skeletal frame, and his painted grin seemed to ripple, as though it weren't paint at all but a part of him. He dragged a rusted knife along the ground, the sound grating and metallic. "For tonight's show," Grinny growled, "we'll play a little game." His eyes scanned the crowd, stopping on me. 3 guests, 3 players, and only one prize, freedom. Before I could react, the ground beneath us shifted, and we were standing in a maze of mirrors. The air reeked of blood and decay, and faint laughter echoed through the labyrinth. Kevin, Sophie, and I stood together, but Grinny's voice rang out, omnipresent. "Find the way out before I find you. The rules are simple. Run, hide, survive." Sophie grabbed my arm, her eyes wide with fear. "What the hell is this?" "I don't know," I said, my voice shaking. "But we need to move." We took off down the nearest corridor, the mirrors warping our reflections. In some, we looked normal, but in others our faces were twisted, bloodied, or worse, missing entirely. Grinny's laughter grew louder, closer. "This way," Kevin shouted, leading us through the maze. We turned a corner and came face to face with a mirror that didn't reflect us. Instead, it showed Grinny, standing just inches behind us, his knife raised. "Run," Sophie screamed. We bolted, but the laughter followed, accompanied by the scrape of the knife against the floor. No matter how fast we ran, Grinny seemed to be everywhere. At one point, Kevin tripped and fell, but before we could help him, a pair of hands burst through a nearby mirror, dragging him inside. "Kevin!" I shouted, but his screams were cut short. All that was left was a smear of blood on the glass. "We're not getting out of here," Sophie whispered, tears streaming down her face. "We have to," I said, gripping her hand tightly. "We can't stop now." We stumbled through the maze, the mirrors showing worse and worse images, us being torn apart, Grinny wearing our faces, Sophie crying over my lifeless body. The laughter never stopped, growing louder with every step. Finally, we found a door. It was small and wooden, with the word exit carved crudely into it. We made it, Sophie breathed, reaching for the handle.
No.
I grabbed her arm, pulling her back just as the door swung open to reveal Grinny. His grin was impossibly wide now, his teeth jagged and yellow. He lunged at us, his knife gleaming. I grabbed a shard of broken mirror from the ground and swung it wildly, catching Grinny across the face. His grin faltered for the first time, and black ichor oozed from the wound. "You can't win," he hissed, his voice echoing from every direction. "You're already mine." "Not yet," I growled, plunging the shard into his chest. Grinny let out a guttural scream, the mirrors around us shattering into blinding light. When I opened my eyes, Sophie and I were back at the edge of the quarry. The carnival was gone, no tents, no lights, just an empty field. Kevin was nowhere to be found. We never spoke about that night again. The posters disappeared, and nobody in town mentioned the carnival. But sometimes, late at night, I hear faint laughter, and I can't shake the feeling that Grinny is still watching, waiting.